Hi, I'm Bobby Lang with Sportsman's Warehouse, and welcome to Sportsman's Warehouse Fly Tying Theater. Today I'm going to tie you a pheasant tail nymph. This nymph is a very good basic nymph to use in most rivers and even some lakes, as it imitates many of the aquatic insects that you'll come across. Stoneflies, mayflies, even damsels. It all depends on what size you want to tie it in, and you try and tie it to match the size of the insects in the stream that you're fishing. The materials we'll be using are standard nymph hook. I've also added a bead to the front of it, so we'll be doing the bead head pheasant tail nymph. And as the name implies, we'll be using pheasant tail and peacock herl. Those are the basic and really the only materials for this fly. It's a very basic fly. As with all flies, we'll start by tying in your thread base. You give a few extra wraps behind the bead just to hold it to the front so it doesn't slide back as we're tying. And we'll wrap that back to near the point of the hook. That's where I'll trim that tag end off. At this point, I'll continue with the thread wraps beyond that point of the hook back to the bend and stop there. That way I'm even with about the barb on the hook. At this point, you take your pheasant tail and you want some good long feathers to work with. The first part we'll be tying is the tail. As with all flies that you tie, proportion's the name of the game, so grab about 5 or 6 pheasant tail fibers. Make sure the ends are all even, and then measure out your tail. You want it to be about the length of the straight part of the hook. So I'll measure that out, switch it over, holding it down at that point, and tying it in. I'll then take and wrap the thread wraps up to secure those feathers in to about where the abdomen or the thorax, the abdomen ends and the thorax will begin. I'll go ahead and trim those feathers. Some people will leave them and fold them back and tie them in to build up bulk as well. But I'll trim them and then retie them in. I'll bring that back to the beginning of the tail. At this point, the other material I forgot to mention that we'll use is copper wire. At this point, I'll tie in a strand of copper wire. Don't need any more than about 6 inches. And I'll secure that in next to the part that we'll use as the body, or as the abdomen. I'll bring that up, the thread wraps up to about where the thorax will be, and then I'll grab those pheasant tail fibers and bring them forward, forming the body of the fly. These fibers will test your patience, as it takes a little bit of. And if you short yourself on the fibers, the nice thing about this is you can always tie in more, which it looks like I did short myself. So I'll wrap that, tie that off, trim it, grab a few more fibers, another set, tie them in, bring them back to the point that I ran out of fiber, and then continue. And you can bring that up into the thorax, because you can always, your thorax is going to be built up with the peacock herl. At this point, I'll wrap that copper wire or brassy wire up the abdomen. in nice evenly placed wraps. And I'll tie that off in the thorax area of the fly. And before I tie in the peacock herl, I'll just go and make some good thread wraps through here to tie down all these other materials. I'll then tie in what we'll be using for the wing case, more pheasant tail fibers. I'll fasten those to the top of the hook and bring that back to about the point that you want to begin your thorax. Now we'll tie in the peacock herl. And I like to take a few strands of this, use about 3 or 4 strands. And because it's going to be covered by a wing case, they don't have to be all even or all the same. You can just grab a good clump of the peacock herl, trim off the butt ends of those. Tie it in. Just make a couple of nice wraps. When you use a lot of that, you just need to make a couple wraps up the shank towards the head with it. A couple wraps of thread to tie it off, and you're done with the thorax. Fasten those ends down behind the bead. And then you bring the fibers of pheasant tail that you tied in to form the wing case, and just bring those over the top. Fasten them down, 2 wraps, and then I'll split those fibers to form the legs of the fly. It helps to use a bodkin at this point, just to help separate those fibers. Like so. Try and split them evenly. And just bring them back and fasten it down. Then you can trim those legs to whatever length you'd like. I usually go back just a hair beyond the thorax, and then I'll finish the fly with a whip finish. A 3 or 4 wrap whip finish. Trim that, and then add the head cement. You have your basic beadhead pheasant tail nymph.